Hey guys, this is my tutorial for making this shawl or scarf. It depends how big you want to make it. I call it Vickie Likes Red because my grandma's name is Vickie. I don't usually call her Vickie, I call her Gammy, but I made this for her and I'm sharing it with you guys. So I'm going to jump right into it. You can read my pattern in front of you. I'm going to use a smaller hook when I do my chainless foundation because that's how my tension works. I have read of other people who need to use a larger hook and then they go down for the regular pattern. So you make sure you're doing what's good for you, okay? So I want to show you how I start when I'm doing this chainless single crochet foundation. Just chain 2, then you go right into that first one that you made. Yarn over and pull through 1, that creates the chain at the bottom, and then yarn over, pull through 2, that's your single crochet. This place that you had pinched, that's where we're going to go back into. Pull it back up, yarn over 1, that's the chain at the bottom, then yarn over 2, that's the single crochet. And you can do this the entire length that you need. Because I'm just going to show you a small swatch, I want to be able to show you the beginning and the end of every row. I am only going to be doing a repeat twice. So I'm going to do 4, repeat of 4, plus 1, that's how it's written. So that means I'm going to do 4 and 4. I'm just going to do it twice, plus that 1 extra. So that 1 extra keeps everything an odd number of stitches so that the pattern works out, all right? Yours is probably going to be somewhere in the hundreds. My original scarf here, I used 174. So that's a lot. It's a lot of chaining and a lot of counting. I find this easier. It's got more stretch and I can count it and just add a stitch without having to do the whole chain and single crochet and frogging and all that, right? So right now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 on my hook. I need to get to 9, so I'm going to keep going. This is 5 single crochet. This is number 6 single crochet. This is number 7 chain, single crochet. You can see where I'm going in there. It's number 8 and single crochet, and number 9. And of course, these are US terminology. You can see what I'm doing. You know that that's what I'm doing. Now, row 2, we're gonna chain 1 and turn it. That's how I like to do it. It doesn't count for this row. So now we've got our stitches. You can see this first one, because my chain doesn't count, this is where we're going to start. And we're going to do single crochet all the way across. Oops, only grabbing 1. We're just doing singles. So 1, 2. Oh, I have to change my hooks. I can already tell it's getting too tight. So you might need to change hooks as well, depending on what you did. So try again. Go 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, I got under too many loops there. 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. You obviously are going to have many more because this has to go across your shoulders and down each arm. Usually a scarf or a shawl is as long as you are tall. So you can measure it that way as well, or if you're making it for someone and you know about how tall they are. Mine is just doing 9 so that I can show you each beginning and end of the row. Now we're on row 3. We're going to chain 2, 1, 2, and that's going to count as our first stitch. So now when it says we're going to chain 1, and we're going to skip this one. So this was our first one, skip that one, double crochet here. We're going to make this nice little ladder all the way across, chain 1, skip that one, double crochet into here. If you've done my interlocking patterns, you're familiar with all of these chain, double crochet, chain, double crochet, chain, double crochet, right? And the last one, skip here, go into the very last stitch. You have a nice big ladder. Mine's a very short ladder, yours is big. Row 4, we're going to single crochet in the windows. This chain is not really counting as a stitch. We're going to put 2 single crochets in the window. 1, 2. Okay, so that counts as 3 and 4. My yarn got a little bit weird there. 5 and 6, 7 and 8, and of course, because we need it to stay an odd number, these 2 single crochets at the beginning, or however you did it, if it's a standing double crochet or whatever it was, you need to go right into those stitches to lock this row in place. We don't want everything slip sliding around. I want that to be nice and straight on the edges, so I go into that second chain. Row 5 is a moss stitch. You may be familiar with moss stitch already. You know how it goes. If not, we're going to chain 1. It doesn't really count as a chain, or I mean a stitch. Okay, so I want to put a single crochet on the edge to really lock it in there and make it strong. Then we're going to chain 1 and skip 1 and go into here. That's where we're going to do next single crochet. Chain 1, skip 1, go in, chain 1, skip 1, go in, chain 1, skip 1, and that'll be our last stitch. Nice and even. All right, I had to cut my video there. Let's get back to this row 6. This is probably the hardest part. We're going to start with chaining 2. It counts as a double crochet. You can do something else if you like, if you wanted to do a standing or whatever it is that people do, but 2 counts for me, and that's pretty in my opinion. You also need to do a chain again at the top to count for the gap. Then the instructions talk about these chain 1 gaps, okay? So that's from the moss stitch that we created all these little gaps. We're going to skip the first gap, and we're going to be doing a treble into the second gap. So yarn over twice, go into the gap, make our triple or treble depending on what you call it, and then always a chain space between them. Now do our double yarn over again, and now we're going into that gap that we had skipped before. Make sure when you go into the gap that you're only taking the gap. You don't want to crochet around that treble crochet that you had just made, because you want to make an X. And then always a chain space again between them. So skip 1 chain gap. We're going to go into the next one. Whoops, yarn over twice, go into that gap. You have obviously a lot more gaps to work with, but if your stitch count is correct, you'll have the right amount of gaps. Chain 1, do a treble, and then we're going to go backwards into this gap. Make sure not to take that treble that you had just done. You don't want your yarn overs to twist it in there. Make sure you're doing your chain space. And then the final is just a double crochet. When you get to the end of your row, there's no more chain gaps, then you want to lock it down with a double crochet into the stitch. And that's how you would get a row full of X's. And there's lots of them, you see? So you'll keep going all the way across. Row 7, I call it moss into chain gaps because you're doing the moss stitch again, only this time we're going to be going into those gaps that we've created. So this gap here, this gap here, this gap here, each of the gaps, it's kind of a waste of time to try and go into the stitches, so we just use the gaps. What we need to do is keep our stitch count correct. So right now I'm still working with 4 for the X, 4 for the X, and because we had to kind of add an extra one to lock it in, when we do this moss stitch, we're essentially moving everything over one. That's probably way too complicated, hey? I hope it doesn't confuse you. The point is, when we do this moss stitch, we're going to be bringing our count back into line, okay? So we do the first chain, it doesn't count a stitch, and you still are not going to put anything in there. Our first single crochet is going to go into the gap. So this counts as stitch number 1. Then you do a chain, that's your second stitch. Then you go into that gap again, so stitch number 3. And then a chain, that's your 4th stitch. Then go into the gap, that's number 5. Chain is number 6. Single crochet is number 7. A chain is number 8, so that's what mine was. Now you could go into this gap here to lock it in, or if you want it to be really, if you don't like the way it wiggles, you can go into the stitch. That part's a bit up to you. If you want to go into the gap, it still locks it in. So now we have our repeat of 4 plus 1. And that's how we keep the stitch count correct. Okay, sorry about that interruption again. We just had to cut, but now we are on row 8. It is single crochet across, just like row 2, but I wanted to still show it to you on here. I did my chain 1. We're going to go into the stitch, that's number 1. Your next stitch, if you're really picky, you can go into that stitch, but you can also just use the gap. I think it looks pretty much the same and it saves me a lot of time. So for the single crochets, I go into the stitch, but for the chain gaps, I just go into the gap. And I go all the way across. You're just matching them up 1 to 1 so that you have 9 stitches. Well, no, you'll have more than 9. I have 9 stitches because my short little, and then your final one is into that end. So if you put your first one in and then gap, you can count them all the way across. The pattern says then to repeat row 3 3 times. We've already shown it to you how to do. That's this part here. I wanted to point out that you are going into the stitches so that the stitches go straight up and down. You don't want to go into these gaps, all right? So remember, we're going to chain 2, that counts as the double crochet. Then we do 1 because we're making a window. We're going to skip this gap. This would have been our stitch, but our chaining is counting. So we're skipping 1, we're going into the next one. Chain 1, skip and go into the next one. Chain 1, skip the whole, go into the next one, all the way across. Mine's real short, so we're almost at the end. There. And when you go back to do this, you're going to do it 3 times. So we're going to do chaining 2 plus 1 for the gap. Now this counts as there. We're not going to the gap, we're going right into that stitch that we had created so that it's like a net, a boxy net, okay? And of course, if you want to alter your pattern, you go right ahead. It's just not my pattern anymore, is it? And then at the end, I like to go into the actual stitch. You had 3 chains here. So my final one, I go into the second chain. And that keeps everything nice and square. It's not sliding around. All right. Then you will be turning it to the next one. And go into that stitch to keep everything nice and square. Then repeating the patterns. I'm not going to repeat them on the video because you can rewind it and go to the beginning of the video. If you don't remember how to do something, you just watch this video again and again. So here's our 1, 2, 3 stitches. We're going to go right into that second stitch. When you're all done, you've done the pattern. It's as long as you want it. It's as wide as you want it. I put a border on mine. I just did a single crochet on everything because I like the way it looks. It's not 100% necessary, but it is an option. I'm sure you can come up with all sorts of creative things. And it can be difficult to find where you put the borders because our edges are so different from each other. So my general rule is that on a single crochet row and a moss stitch row, I do 1 stitch. And on this, because it's the height of a double crochet, I do 2 stitches. 1 stitch, 1 stitch, 2 stitches. I just do single crochet all the way around. And when I get to a corner, I do a single crochet, chain 2, and another single crochet in the same spot, and that turns it to go to the next. And that is how you can make your own beautiful little scarf. I hope the video helps. I hope the pattern stands on its own, and I hope you guys like it. That's it for me. Bye.